Hello then. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really weird on this table. I'm sure the others will agree, because we're looking out at you but can only see the first 3 rows because the lights are so bright in our eyes. So if you're actually trying to catch my attention later on, you're going to have to do something pretty drastic for me to see you. Anyway, we've got an interesting discussion here. We've got a great panel. We're actually expecting somebody else to turn up who hasn't arrived as yet. If they come, we will slot them in. But my name's Ivan Monkton. I am the chair of Welsh Labour Grassroots Momentum in Wales. I'm also a very active Unite trade unionist and a Labour Party member. We have 3 people on the top table at the moment. Michelle Dorrell to my left. Some of you might recognise her from Question Time. That's what she's famous for. Hopefully she's going to be famous for being a Labour councillor in future. We have Lisa Mckenzie next to me, an academic sociologist from Middlesex University. And to the right of me we have Edward Dawson. And as has been said, I have the greatest respect for somebody that is a local Conservative chairman to come along to such a festival as this, into such a room as this, with such a panel as this, and to stand his corner. I think that is deserving of huge respect, and I would hope that you make sure that you give him that. So, each speaker is going to speak for 5 minutes, or 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll take questions and discussion at the end. So we'll deal with them. I actually seated them in the same list as I've got notes about them. It makes it nice and easy for me. So first of all, we will have Michelle Dorrell, as I say, somebody that is famous from Question Time, an ex-Tory voter who has joined the Labour Party and this year has been elected a Labour councillor. So, Michelle.
Thank you very much for having me. I still find this all very overwhelming. I've been in the Labour Party for only 3 years and obviously I'm already elected. My journey is probably very different to most traditional Labour councillors. I grew up in a non-political family. We never spoke politics. Even when I remember as a child the poll tax riots were happening, my mum and dad were sat round the table worrying about paying their poll tax and their bills. There was never the link between political policy and the consequences. So throughout my entire childhood, I never got it. Then in my early adult years, I was apathetic. Politics did not mean a thing to me. I didn't care, I wasn't interested, never listened to anything, never got involved. Probably it was the Iraq War was what started to wake me up to it, because I was angry with the fact that we were going into a war that even I thought was illegal, even though I didn't understand a lot about what was happening, but I knew something was very wrong. However, I was reading the wrong things. I was reading the Daily Mail, I was reading The Sun, I was watching the BBC, and I was watching Sky. So everything of which I was taking on board was obviously the bias and the narrative of which was being portrayed to all of us. So Question Time happened, and what an awakening that was. I was on social media within hours of that happening, and oh my God, what a backlash. There was a lot of people that were congratulating me for standing up to Amber Rudds, for speaking out, but there was a hell of a lot more directed to me, calling me an all right Jack, look at you, you only give a damn now, you're possibly hit by it. Unfortunately, with most people in politics, if you're not involved in it, if you don't understand it, that's true for all of us. We don't realise the actions of our consequences until it hits us personally. But it woke me up. The difference was I woke up to it, I went away and I researched, and I started to read things that I'd never read before. I started to listen to people that I would never in my life listen to before, and everything that I knew that was wrong with our country, everything that I thought that was wrong in society, it started to fit together. I was a socialist, I just didn't ever know I was, because unfortunately throughout my life socialism has always been conflated with communism, you know, the Reds under the beds and all of that story. So I never looked at it, I never looked at its true meaning. and I went away and I found my true home. I joined the Labour Party in April of 2016 and I was welcomed with open arms. Not only that, I have become a trade unionist, I'm a member of Unite the Union, I'm also a member of Momentum, and I'm involved in activism in the heart of Toryland. I'm down in Folkestone and Hythe, right at the corner of South East Kent, where it is literally Tory everywhere. But we've started to make massive changes. At the local elections only 3 weeks ago, we went from having no Labour councillors on our district council to now having 6. And we took away the overall majority of the Tories. They have now no overall control and they are scared because they've got all of these voices they've never heard before, starting to talk to him, starting to hold him to account and actually scrutinising him, rather than before they could do whatever they wanted because they all controlled it and they were able to push through whatever they wanted. But guess what? That ain't happening now. So when it comes to the gentrification of our area, where they are building mass luxury housing whilst everyone else is being pushed out of their hometowns that they love, well, we're going to try and stop that. We are going to be building social housing again because that's what we need. We need homes for our local people. Not everyone will ever be in a position to buy. That's normal. That has been the way it has been throughout history. You used to have, years ago, if you worked for the mines, the mining company used to build housing. And then after, obviously, Clement Attlee, we had social housing. For those who wanted a home, they had the ability to have a home. Obviously, all of that changed after Thatcher and the beginning of neoliberal politics, which I now know. Before, I didn't know the difference between communism, socialism, capitalism and neoliberalism, but now I do. And as they have said many a times before, we can be the media. We are the ones that are now spreading the message. So me, I'm just a nail technician. I'm nothing special. I'm just a normal, average, working class lass who has actually found out for herself what politics means, what the consequences of policy means, and I can now spread that message and tell all of the other working class people that have been led by the narrative of the media. So hopefully they'll stop kicking themselves in the arse when they vote Tory. Hopefully they won't again.
Thanks, Michelle. Certainly you've hit the ground running. You've been a Labour Party member 3 years, a councillor only 3 weeks, and you just spoke for 6 minutes without a piece of paper in front of you or anything. That's just like sort of typical Conservative confidence, and you've brought it over to the Labour Party, so congratulations and well done, and good luck for the future. Our second speaker is Lisa Mckenzie, as I said, an academic sociologist from Middlesex University, dealing with class inequality, social justice and working class culture. She stood for Class War Party in the general election 2015 and is another anti-gentrification protester. You heard what Michelle said there. So, Lisa, over to you.
Okay, is this on? Is it on?
Yeah.
So we're going to do redemption stories that, once I was this and now I found alive. So I'll start a bit with a redemption story. I've got one as well. So I was born and brought up in a mining community just like this one in Nottinghamshire, a place called Sutton-in-Ashfield, and everybody worked down the pit. It's exactly like this. We didn't have much infrastructure to leave Sutton-in-Ashfield because we didn't really need to. We were quite a self-contained place. My community was staunch Labour. At that time when I was born, the NUM, it actually changed after the 1984 strike. And everybody in my family, everybody in my community, everybody voted Labour. In fact, you would never imagine doing anything else but voting Labour. And I don't know if you've heard this, sometimes people get offended by it, but it's what we used to say. If you put a red rosette on a pig, for Labour, the pig would win. And this is the sort of community I was brought up in, and I grew up again, at my granddad's knee, a miner who eventually died of emphysema before he even retired. I grew up at his knee telling me how special and brilliant we were as working class people. I was never once ashamed or even knew that there was a shame attached to being working class. Not for 1 minute, not until the 1984 strike. And I grew up at his knee saying to me, Lisa, we're the working class. We are not greedy, we look after each other. We make sure we're all right. We keep the lights on, we're miners. Without us, the country would fold. We keep the lights on, we're important. And I grew up with such an incredible pride, which I've still got, and I still struggle about. I don't understand why it's a bad thing to be working class. I was brought up absolutely looking down my nose at the middle class, you know, how boring they were and how unfunny they were, and they did crazy things like sent their kids away. You know, I remember the women in my community talking, going, you know, how cruel, how could you send your kids away to school? What an evil thing. You know, and I was like clutching my mum thinking, thank God I was born here and not to them bastards. You know, and I grew up with this absolute pride and love for who I was and where I came from. And that also included the Labour Party as well, because then our local councillors, I mean the local councillor lived 3 doors away from me. My mum was a member of the Labour Party and stood for local council. And so it also, my love also included that red rose as well. And I again was brought up staunch Labour, and I remember my mum taking me to vote. 1988, would have been 1988, first time I ever voted. And again, my mum took me and said, this is what we do, we vote, and I voted Labour. But to be honest, my redemption story is a different redemption story, because what I started to do from probably the age of about 16 is I started to see, and perhaps it might be my generation because I was 16 in 1984, I started to see the Labour Party perhaps as not my natural home, as something else. And again, these changes started to happen late 1980s, when our local MP was flown in, and his name was Jeff Hoon. I don't know if anybody remembers Jeff Hoon, the architect of the Iraq War. And he was flown in from London, and I remember my mum campaigning vigorous, like out every day. And I remember being 18, being in bed, hungover, and I mean, mum used to go around in the vans chatting in the tunnel, you know, vote for Labour, and I remember being in bed going, oh my God, why don't she just shut up? And Jeff Hoon came into our community, and he started to change the way that my community started to feel about the Labour Party. My mum was still supported him, still was vigorous about him, but she used to argue with him all the time. And then, of course, we saw less and less and less of him, to the point when, you know, we realised that this guy was not for Sutton in Ashfield, this guy was for Westminster, this guy was for Tony Blair. And then over the years, my redemption story really is, you said you realised, once you knew what socialism was, you felt, I found my natural home. Well, I did the same thing with anarchism. So when I started to find out about anarchism, that's when I started to think about my natural home. And one of the things, I suppose, if we're going to talk about why working class people are voting for Tories, or actually, now the Brexit Party, or any other way than they're supposed to, which has always been, Labour has taken for granted that working class vote, totally for granted. So I think if we open today's debate up and talk about why are working class people voting for people that they're not supposed to, I think that would be an interesting argument, because the last time I voted was 1997, and I never voted again. And what I do say is I don't vote, I do street politics instead.
Okay, thanks Lisa. That was an interesting contribution, an interesting angle. And of course, when this panel was drawn up and this occasion was put to paper, it was before we knew that there were going to be European elections. There was no Brexit party then. But the question you've asked is absolutely sound. This today could just as much be why are working class people voting Brexit, just as much as why do they vote Conservative. Anyway, thank you for that, Lisa. We will now move on. We were supposed to have Shazia Awan Scully, but she hasn't arrived, so we're going to move on. And we have on my right Edward Dawson, who is the chair of Merthyr and Rhymney Conservative Association. He was a councillor and member of the Regional Assembly in Hampshire, was the director of the Council for Protection of Rural England in London, and has written a book called, co-authored a book called Money and Influence in Europe. And we're very pleased that he's agreed to come into this lion's den in Merthyr today. Thank you, Edward.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I am very pleased to be here to start off with. I hope to persuade you that we haven't all got two heads and that we may be worth voting for. So I want to try and answer the question that is posed today, this afternoon. Why do working class people vote Conservative? Well, the first thing I would say is that, yes, they do. That working class people do vote Conservative. Why is that? Is it because people are voting with their heads or their hearts, often talked about? Are they following old loyalties, old tribalisms perhaps? Do people vote for their own personal interest or for the good of the community? Do they think one or the other? Do they think perhaps that Labour's record is actually a bit patchy? I've prepared some notes for today. I thought that it was respect for you. I researched the subject a little bit, and it does look as if there have only been 6 Labour Prime Ministers over the past, the past century, since 1929, the very first one, Ramsay MacDonald, and there have been 14, soon to be 15, Conservative Prime Ministers, Tory Prime Ministers. Now, Keir Hardie, of course, here, this is the birthplace of Labour, I suppose, where we are here in Merthyr. Keir Hardie, Ramsay MacDonald, all these are key people. And I think history is important. We do need to either celebrate or commemorate history and where movements have emerged from. So I'm not opposed to that, and I think Merthyr Rising Festival is a great occasion, actually. We were chatting beforehand on the panel here about it. I do think that it is. The pub across the road is called Dick Penderyn, and there's a society for him, I'm told. Well, he was hanged because he was a threat, 1831. I think that was fascinating. I don't think he was hanged because he was guilty. I mean, I'll tell you what I think. I don't think he was guilty. I think it was actually a gross and deliberate miscarriage of justice. It really was. You probably all know what happened. 1831, he was accused of stabbing somebody. He was literate, numerate, educated figure in many ways, but he was involved with the risings and so on. And the judge in his case, and I've had the privilege of reading the judge's letter. I've got it here actually. Justice Bosanquet, he wrote to his wife saying that he wasn't very happy about this, but he said he's a public servant. That's what he said to his wife. This isn't the judge's summing up. And I have to think about law and order. That's what it was really about. And he says, I don't want to see the red flag, it's your Symbols Day, the red flag and the sans-culottes, as he calls them, I think he means without trousers, sans, ragged trousers, spreading through our streets like cholera, he said. I have to do something. So I had to put on the black cap and pronounce the death sentence. And of course that went to Lord Melbourne, the Prime Minister. He didn't do anything. He allowed it to go. It could have been transported, could have been sent to Van Diemen's Land, as they called it then, now to Tasmania. Very easy to do that. But they wanted to make an example of it, and it's one of the tragedies of history, really, because it was very much a miscarriage. So there you are. History resonates through the ages, and it's very important. Well, looking back at Tory history, we've been going for a long time, actually. We, I think, trace our roots of the Tories and the Whigs back to the time of the Glorious Revolution, 1688, when there was that big change. The Glorious Revolution didn't kill anybody. It's also called the Bloodless Revolution. There was a big change that happened then, and these two political parties emerged. The Whigs being the country landowning classes, the Tories the more industrial or emerging money mercantile classes, I suppose. And that's really where they came from. Now, I think our greatest exponent is Edmund Burke. Now, Burke is not our Marx. I'm referring to Karl Marx. We've got plenty of other theorists that developed theories about conservative. David Hume, for example, Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, his famous book, David Ricardo, another one. But these political theories, I think, took quite a long time to develop and emerge, from, as I say, 1688 to the present time. Now, during that time, there was no Labour Party, though I suppose there were the stirrings of something going on. There were things called the Diggers and the Levellers at that sort of time.
Hecklers.
Sorry?
Hecklers.
Hecklers? Hecklers.
The hecklers.
And they emerged a bit later on, the Chartist movement and so on, in the 1830s, that led to the foundation of the Labour Party, very much here in Merthyr, with Keir Hardie, as I say. But let me tell you a little bit more about conservatism. We believe in individual aspiration. That's our view. Individual aspiration and an endeavour rather than collective action, kind of trade union basis of that. But conservative isn't pacifism. It isn't passive. Don't think that it just sits there quietly. It's a vigorous theory. It adapts, it evolves, and it changes, and that's why it's successful. So if you look back at when some of these Labour Prime Ministers were in office, they didn't necessarily last very long. We heard from Michelle about Clement Attlee. Well, he was only there for one term, and actually people turned against him. They thought he was a bit old and past his prime and everything else. So in 1951, there was an election, the second one after the war, actually it was the third. Churchill came back, the Tories came back, and then there was Macmillan as well. And when it comes to building social housing, Harold Macmillan's record of building social housing is greater than Clement Attlee's. Not that Attlee wouldn't have done it if he'd lasted longer, but Macmillan set the highest target for building what he called council houses. We don't build council houses anymore, really, but he set the highest target. It was remarkable. They were building something like 300,000 houses, which were council-owned with a 60-year mortgage by local authorities from the government, and it worked incredibly well. There's never been, that figure's never been equalled or surpassed since the Macmillan era, 1958, I think that was. So it just shows you what was done. I suppose Labour people may vote Conservative because they will be called reactionaries. It's a common thing that we hear about. Right. It's a pity if that's the case. I think Conservatives prefer what I would call the contingent to the absolute. Conservatives are not keen on strategies and policies and manifestos and so on, other than the minimum one has to do. We prefer the actual to the promised. Conservatives are practical people. They want to get on with things rather than dreaming of great ideas. We prefer the tried to the untested. It's the theory, and you can challenge me afterwards, of course. Do we believe in social justice? I'll try and finish now, coming to the end. Yes, we do, but we have our own definition of what social justice is. Something that arises naturally at a local level rather than imposed through central targets and quotas and so on. That's the way that we would approach it. Finally, I would say, well, there's no qualification for government, but virtue and wisdom, and we try to apply that over the 2 centuries that we've held office of government. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Edward. Some interesting points in there. We talked about the miscarriage of justice with Dick, and the leaflets are available downstairs if anybody wants to pick one up and join the party. And you did seem to suggest that maybe he could have been transported and that wouldn't have been such a miscarriage of justice, although you acknowledged that you thought he was probably not guilty. I'm an agricultural trade unionist, and of course next month is the Merthyr Rising Festival, which I shall also be at. So there's quite a history of miscarriages of justice. Just one final thing, and this is me just getting my little bit in. There wasn't, you said there was no Labour Party, of course, for so long. Well, of course, there wasn't a Labour Party because Labour people weren't allowed to vote. I mean, it's almost within living memory that universal suffrage actually came in, and it was your party and the Whigs that fought so long and hard to make sure that we didn't get the vote. But we've got it now, and we're making up ground, and we might only have 6 Prime Ministers compared to your 14, but I tell you what, Jeremy Corbyn's on the way. But anyway,
1832. Mustn't forget about that. I'm sure you do.
I'm so glad you're here, because it's usually me that they hate.
okay.
They're not voting anarchists, they usually hate me. So.
Right, I'm putting my hand up so that I can try and see the top. Is it possible to turn those lights down or put the lights in the hall up a bit so that I can actually see who wants to come in? That's a bit better, thank you. Okay, so I can see 4 or 5 hands. I'll take you, and then you, and then, is there a woman anywhere? No, I can't see one with a hand up, so I'll take you. So you 3 first, okay? And then we'll have questions. If you could keep it, please, as brief as possible, so that we can get as many speakers as we can in.
Thank you. I'm from the constituency of Warsaw, about 12 miles outside of Birmingham. It's a industrialised area which should be prominently Labour. Unfortunately, in the last local elections, it bucked the trend and we became a Conservative council, which I was glad to hear. And we have kind of taken the working class for granted, shall we say, so I totally agree with that. It's something that we're trying to change. You know, we're seen as leftist revolutionist part of momentum. You know, all these guys are taking over. You know, we just basically want democracy to prevail. That's all we want. Back onto what Michelle said. I think you are special, and you're special because we need people such as yourselves to step forward, because Parliament doesn't represent society, whether that's in the Tory party, Lib Dems or Labour. You know, we need more now technicians, more street cleaners, more postmen, more dustmen. You know, we need people who actually represent us rather than eat and boys, shall we say. Regarding why do we vote Tory, or not me personally, but other people. So I believe that actually it should start in the classroom, we should be educating in a non-biased way. Now we need to educate people what actually happens at local elections, general, European. I have people last week in my workplace saying, I'm voting for Nigel Farage. You know, you might be voting for that party, but you're not actually voting for him. So I think it all starts with education. Yeah. So the education would be when we're going out on the streets, and probably to Michelle, more than anybody, when we're going out on the streets, how do we convert those Tory voters into Labour?
Okay, thank you. Yep.
In Shaz's absence on the panel, I'm going to reiterate.
Can you speak up?
In Shaz's absence on the panel there, I'll reiterate a line that her husband Roger often said, which is that Labour has won every election in Wales for the last 100 years. It's come first, except for one, which was the European election poll in 2009, where it came second, a close second. But all of the evidence suggests that the results that come out tomorrow is that the Labour Party will come third in Wales for the first time in its history. And what my question to you is, has Brexit broken voting allegiances in Wales?
Okay, thank you. And one more question there, and then we'll take the 3.
This is for the Conservative councillor. I just want to ask him about when he's talking about social justice. Does he think that Conservative policies has caused the rise of food banks in the last 10 years from 35,000 to 1.6 million?
Okay, thank you. Well, that's a direct question, but I'm going to leave you. I'm going to give you a break for a few minutes. Is there anything that you would like to say on any of those questions?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with your question in the front. Okay, so I'll be honest. The problem we have is we've got to undo a lot of the damage that's been done to the Labour Party because of the new Labour years. Unfortunately, I would never have joined, and I will say this with my hand on my heart, I would never have joined the Labour Party if it wasn't for Jeremy Corbyn and returning it back to the Democratic Socialist Party it was born to be. I cannot stand neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is this. It is more toxic than capitalists because it tries to pretend with a sweet face, oh, we're not that bad, but no, actually you're just as bloody bad because you're trying to hide what you're really after, and that's deregulation, that's corporate welfare, that's privatisation, and that's the end of everything that we have built over 100 years. So we have, unfortunately, we still have a problem with some of our own people in our own party. They may be in Labour, but Labour's not within them. And this is some of the things we have to fight. We are fighting some of our own people sometimes, but we will get there because, yes, people like me, we are coming into the Labour Party and we are rising through the ranks, and long may it continue. Labour needs to represent what it belongs to, and that's Labour.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to pick up both your points, really. Education, I don't know what you mean by that, because actually, for me, becoming educated means that I'm a free thinker and I get to think beyond the realms of a two-party system, and I get to think beyond the realms of the very limited things that when you were in a two-party system, that you can move a millimetre each way. So as education goes, I'm a lecturer, so I want everybody to be educated, but I don't want people to be educated to vote for this way or vote for the other way. What I want people to do is to be able to free think and start to think through their own life experiences. So I always get worried when I come to places like this that are full of sort of really Labour loyalists, particularly Corbyn loyalists, that want education. Because I always worry that you just want, do you want education which says you've got to vote Labour? Because the thing is, if you've got a truly educated, free-thinking society, we would not have Westminster, we would not have Parliament, we would not have the Conservative Party, and we wouldn't have the Labour Party either. Because all is absolutely failing. It's not fit for purpose and it's failing. Which brings me to the next point about Brexit. Is Brexit, and I recently, actually last night I got back, I was in Berlin for the last 2 days at a conference talking with German academics about Brexit. They're fascinated, everybody's fascinated. And they keep asking the same questions. What is Brexit called? What's it called? Brexit has caused nothing. Brexit is not causing. Brexit is the
Destruction.
No, Brexit is not what it is. It's the product. It's the conclusion. It's the conclusion of an unfair, unequal society. A society that has relied more and more on the individual and moved away from that collective action and collectivity of community, and actually moving further and further towards individualism. Brexit is the consequence of that. It's also the consequence of the breakup of the political system, which doesn't work, and it's the consequences of these deep unfair issues like food banks. Because, I did research with women in Bethnal Green in East London and in Nottinghamshire, where I'm from. And they all voted for Brexit. The first time they'd ever voted. Never voted for anybody else. Never registered. But they voted in the EU election. And they voted out. And I remember saying to one of the women, you know, do you think, and this is a woman who is homeless in London, in Tower Hamlets, Labour Mayor, Labour Council, Labour Mayor of London, who is also funded by property developers as well. And I asked her, and I said to her, by voting Brexit, do you think your life's going to get better if we leave the EU? And she said no, but I just can't stand it being the same. And when you've got that, you know, that is a powerful, powerful political comment from people that are deemed to be not political, but are highly political, because their politics come from their experience. And I think all political parties have forgotten that.
Edward, okay, now you speak on any of the three, or all of them, but especially the last one.
I'm sure that I'll start with the first two and then come back. Well, I'm fascinated to hear Michelle. She's a sort of Labour person through and through, although recent. I suspect if you sliced her in half, you'd see the word Labour Party right through the middle of her. She's become a Labour person, and no, absolutely fine. It's amazing to see that sort of commitment and strength of feeling and character. You know, not everybody in politics has that at all. You know, so I'm amazed, and I congratulate you for your commitment. I may say that I think it's a bit misguided, but I would say that, wouldn't I? My feeling is that the Labour Party often takes its voters for granted. Apart from the very committed ones, like Michelle, there are a lot of people that are taken for granted. We talk about industrial areas, like you were mentioning that. This is an industrial area which has been like a roller coaster from its early times when there were just hill farmers through the steel and iron era to
They weren't
the coal
just
mine
hill
era.
farmers, come on. Don't say they were just hill farmers.
But it was a small economy.
They're hard-working, bloody.
They were, but it was a very small
wealth
economy.
creators.
Of course they were, and I know some of them, and I don't minimise them in any way. But the economy was very small, very small. It then grew when iron came, the iron masters of Merthyr, famous ones, when it was producing more iron than anywhere else. And then the coal mines and so on brought in people from not just around the country, from abroad as well, as far as Italy and so on. So, but it's been an up and down thing. This area, Merthyr and the South Wales valleys, has had an industrial period. But it's been in the past. World wars have helped. The First World War, the Second World War, munitions factories, bringing the Hoover factory very famously in the 1950s and so on. But it's not been a steady thing. It's gone up and down, and now I think it's in a patch. So wait for the next thing. I've got some ideas on what the next thing might be, but I won't mention them just yet.
I have as well.
Okay. If I talk about Brexit just a little bit, I think somebody says, has it broken the party system? Well, yes, I think to some extent it has. We'll get the result tomorrow evening, and I suspect that a lot of people who normally would vote for, the old loyalties, Conservative voters, I know some of my colleagues, are saying, well, we're going to vote for Farage because we want out and that's it. We don't want to get into a Brexit argument as such, I think, here, because that could be a separate topic in its own right. But it's certainly shaken all the main parties to their foundations, and I hope they'll come back, because we are traditionally a country which doesn't like revolutions. The glorious revolution, as I say, was a bloodless one. We don't go in for big revolutions like the French or the Americans, or even the Chinese Revolution, the Cultural Revolution, 1949. We tend to be a steady country, whichever party comes in, and they've maintained a traditional basis of doing things. So, broken, but not, it can be put back together, I think. And the question over here, I didn't entirely pick it up, actually.
I think it was... Repeat, it was a short one.
Sorry.
Food bank use in the last 10 years.
Food bank use.
The massive increase in the use of food banks.
1.6 billion.
Oh, the food banks. Yeah. What, you don't like that? You think that's a bad thing? Is that what you're saying?
Do you think it's a good thing? You think that people starving and needing to go to food banks is a good thing?
I don't think it's a good thing, but I have actually I went to Salisbury to have a look at the biggest food bank that was shown around the way it works. Some people think that they are an example of a free society where people can buy food here and there. I don't agree with that. No, I don't agree with that. Some people have said that. We're trying to be open here, aren't we? trying to be
Yeah, let's have your opinion then, not anybody else's.
Come on, let's...
one of the things about...
Just answer the questions.
First of all...
I'm the chairman. Leave me to get him to answer the questions, please. We ask for no heckling. There's no need for heckling. Carry on, please.
There shouldn't be a need for food banks. I'm not saying that they're justified they're there. But there are, as ever, different sides to every argument. You know, food has to be paid for. It's not free. Food is produced by growers and farmers. They have to earn their living as well. So if we suggest that food is, you know, something that's free, just go and get it at a... Well, I think there are questions about that. Although, of course, people are not... They don't become dependent on food bank. There are limited periods, just a few weeks' supply. It's not a constant thing that you can rely on. So it's just something to top people up. It's a pity that they're here. I have seen them and I've worked with them, with the Trussell Trust actually, so even as a Tory, there we are. And it's a pity that we have to have them. I hope that you know, food can be made more easily available. I don't think food is expensive. We always have a cheap food policy in this country, always have had. But there are people who, you know, just aren't able to do that. People do need help, and Conservatives should be willing and ready to help people that are in need and you know, get through those difficult periods in their lives.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another batch of questions. How long have we got left? Where's the organiser? We've only got 5 minutes left. Right, two quick questions. On the front, Lynn. If you make them really quick, we might get another one in.
Okay, thank you, Alan. This question is relating to the relative decline of trade unions and the influence that has had on ordinary working people, possibly voting Tory, Brexit Party, whatever. Because I think I worked all my life in the rail industry, a very unionised industry. You had steel, coal, and other industries, and you had leadership shown in those through the trade unions. You had education, which I benefited from, and that has gone now. So there's a lot of young people who've got no experience of collective work or being a member of a trade union, and they're open to the influence of the media, which, you know, can be extremely negative. So I think that I'd like your comments on whether you think that's an important factor.
Okay, thank you. Lynn?
Just on the importance of our messages conforming to reality and the fact that sometimes they don't. I mean, I'm thinking back to the why people might vote Tory or might vote for Farage. When we were campaigning in 2016, and it was understood by many that it was a vote to remain as you are, and yet against that was offered take back control, it's no surprise that millions of people thought, I've got no control in my life, I'm going to vote for something, even if they didn't really believe it was going to change. And there is a crisis in this country with but very widespread distrust of politicians of all natures. I think in arguments of the past 3 years, the question that comes back to me more and more, and I've argued with people in the street, is they never listen to us. And unless we, and I am of course an active Labour member, actually overcome that and listen to people, think about policies that respond to that, and we are developing an immense amount of good policy work at the moment. It's got to relate to people's real life experience.
I'm going to take one more at the front and then a very quick minute each for people on the top table.
I'll be incredibly quick. We're celebrating 20 years of devolution in Wales at the moment, and yes, Labour have won every national election, but they've done that on really with about 15% of the electorate voting for the Labour Party. So my question wouldn't be really why do working class people vote Tory, but why don't working class people vote?
Yeah. Can I?
Very good. Okay. Yeah, you go first.
Quick. Right. Education. Back to education. Love education, and where are the Workers' Education Authority now? Where are that local? There's those local community colleges and schools that used to do things like, you know, literature for that men and women that worked all day and they wanted to read about Orwell at night, or like the Pitman painters, Where are those things now? Disappeared. The WEA, in Nottingham, where I'm from, they teach you nail technician, or, which I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's the job you have to do to make money. We used to have things like literature that we could do at night. So where, you know, the WEA, where are they? Trade unions. Trade unions, unfortunately, and this is why again, I'm not going to be popular here, they've collapsed into the Labour problem. Unite is a massive union, and in my opinion, it has lost touch with its grassroots. In London, I'm part of something called the UVW, which is the United Voices of the World, which is a wobbly union, and they are a direct action union. They have been winning, they've been organising South American cleaners, and they've been winning because they do direct action. So the trade union movement is not lost, but it needs to change. And I know you're not going to, I know that's not going to be popular. The last one was
why people don't vote.
Why people don't vote. It's for many reasons. One of them is that there is quite rightly no trust, and people look at a ballot paper and think, I hate all of these people.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, first of all, the trade union question there. Now, I've recently been reading a very interesting book which talks about trade union. This is Lord Roban's autobiography of his 10 years as chairman of the National Coal Board. And the second chapter of this book is about dealing with the militants. He was a Labour man through and through. He could have been Prime Minister. But if you read it, it's a very honest account, actually, his book. He says that the trouble he had with trade unions, infiltrated by Labour, they had a reasonable, justifiable job of trying to improve working conditions, wages and all the rest of it. But when that was set aside, there was also a very militant communist element in there. And some even on the others, beyond communist, Maoists, some of them, and he had to deal with these. And he became their arch enemy, even though he was, like Michelle, a Labour person absolutely to his core. The trouble he had was awful, and he said some mines had to close simply because they were uneconomic. They you just couldn't keep them going. But it's a fascinating subject, what he says. If you get the chance to read the book, it's a very fascinating story. Now, when Lisa talks about WEA and education, I actually agree with that. I've done courses for the WEA, so that educational element seems to have disappeared. I'm not sure quite why it has disappeared, actually, but we ought to try and bring that back.
Funding.
To help.
You pulled all funding from
I've told you that's true.
You have pulled all funding for mature people, for everybody over 25. Do you know the access? Do you know the access courses? You charge £3,000 for those. They're not accessible.
Well, okay, I did WA course as a lecturer, and I wasn't paid that much for it. Certainly not £3,000.
No, for this
but we should do more.
course.
We should do more. No, I do agree. And then the last question about people don't vote. That we've had the Labour Assembly for 20 years, I think. A couple of people were saying. Maybe it's because the Labour Party is taking its voters for granted a bit. All parties do that to some extent. They need to be shaken up from time to time. But after a lifetime of voting Labour, I think some supporters might think, what have we achieved? You know, down in Cardiff Bay, the Assembly, you know, there are a lot of criticism about what's been done, not done, and so on. Wales may be a small country, but even small countries can succeed. Look at some of those in Eastern Europe, like Slovenia and Slovakia and so on. They're not large, similar populations, and yet their economic growth rate has been much greater. So, a final point: we have the spectre of nationalism in Wales as well, and in Scotland. And I think in Wales it's partly linguistic, partly cultural. We want to promote the language and the feeling of being Welsh. Scotland, I think, is possibly more political and more economic because there's oil up there and so on, and other issues. But originally, the Scottish nationalists were regarded as right-wing. They were even called Tartan Tories. Seems ridiculous now. Seems ridiculous now because they're a party of the left, not of the Labour Party, but a party that doesn't support the Conservatives in any way. So I think there's a bit of a mixture there, and we need to learn the lesson for all parties. I think they all need a shaking up and make sure that they are representing what people actually believe in, what they would vote for. Very much so.
Okay, thanks very much. So there are your final comments.
Can I
I beg your pardon. Sorry, we've got to be quick.
Yeah, I'll try and be as quickly as possible. Okay, as for your question as to why people aren't voting, they aren't voting because they don't trust any of them. They don't trust any of them because they don't represent them, because they're not them. They don't live their experiences. They're not suffering the way they're going through. They don't have to face austerity in most occasions. Too many of our politicians are coming straight from being lobbyists, or because they went to university, or because they're friends of someone else that's a politician. They're not coming up through the ranks because they are the people that they're meant to be serving. As for your question with regard to unions, now I am a trade unionist. I do believe in the union way because it's the collectiveness. However, there is a problem with some unions with how they have gone. Now, I probably will get a lot of stick for this, and I do apologise.
Don't apologise, say what.
Well, okay. My husband was a member of the GMB union. The GMB union were representing the British gas workers, and they sat by while British Gas slashed their pensions in half, they removed all of their overtime, and they have destroyed their terms and conditions to the point where there are even some engineers who are committing suicide due to the stress and strain of their jobs. And the GMB union representatives, those representatives, I'm not saying the GMB as a whole, but the representatives in there literally sat by and let this happen. And he left because of it, and that broke my heart. And there we go.
Okay, so there you go. I am sorry for the thank you all for coming. There's lots I'd love to say, but we just haven't got time. I think this is a subject that we could have easily had half a day on. Yeah. I mean, not a quarter of the people that had their hands up managed to get a question in, and there's lots we could have said. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for the 3 speakers on the top table, and I don't know what's coming next, but you will be told. Thank you very much.